We'll start calling them buffet. But at any rate, he went to this meeting with these big shots. And he said in the paper, the meeting didn't go anywhere. And that's what I said would happen when the governor told me that he had insisted that they invite me to the meeting. And I thanked the governor, but I told him it would be a waste of my time. They're not going to talk about anything. I'd be invited as an afterthought, and only because you told them to invite me, so I'm not going. And sure enough, the meeting went nowhere. They tried to dictate. So why did I call them the Dalton brothers and Calamity Jane? I gave you the 4 Dalton boys. Susie Buffett was there too. That's Calamity Jane. Warren has given her money to play with and do missionary work, so she'll stay out of his hair. That's what that's all about. And y'all play like you don't know? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. And Senator Chambers, you're recognized for your 3rd time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Sometimes I just love the legislature, the forum that it provides, because there are issues that need to be raised, and we're the ones who ought to raise them. And this body is the very one which will not raise them. Oh, people will go along and whisper behind their hand. They'll grumble in corners and behind pillars and posts. But they won't bring it out in the open and let those rascals know that to have a lot of money does not mean that they're intelligent. Bank robbers get a lot of money, and they're far more ingenious because they run the risk of being shot. These guys just lie, cheat, steal, don't pay the income tax. And that's how they get rich, except for Warren. They call him the Wizard of Omaha. Well, Dick Holland was smart enough to latch on to Warren Buffett's coattails when they were short. And then as Warren's coattails got longer, Dick Holland got longer too. So he's rich too now. He just grabbed onto the wagon like a tin can tag to the dog, to the tail of a puppy dog that is made to run down the streets and the alleys. And these white men have the audacity to assume the role of slave masters and think that I'm going to let them demand that the status quo remain in the public schools, and that status quo is one that cheats our children. And as I stated to the Education Committee yesterday, and y'all going to hear it a lot this session, I'm going to talk about what concerns me. And these children who are being cheated concerns me. And it's my responsibility. And I'm going to assume it with a vengeance. They cannot be given a free ride to mess over these children, their parents, and the communities that they feel have no voice, the communities and people they think fear them. I don't fear them. They fear me. That's why they are afraid to invite me to their meetings, and that has been made clear. Because they cannot order me around. They can't dictate to me. They're accustomed to dealing with my friends of the Caucasian persuasion, and all they have to do is wrinkle their brow, and these white men melt. And that's why these kind of men don't ever come to the legislature or the governor to negotiate. They come to order, because that's what they do, and they usually get their way. That's why that bill that Senator Copeland offered to the Education Committee was one of the most trashy pieces of nonsense that has ever been introduced into this legislature. He took these people at their word. He knew that lawyers had worked on the bill. He knew that lobbyists had worked on the bill. He thought they earned that money which the public is putting up for them to do their job right. And they gave him an atrocity. And we are going to talk about these issues, and I'm prepared to do battle with anybody on this floor on these issues. And I'm not going to go away. I'm not going to be quiet. Thank you, Mr. President. How much time do I have?
1:30.
I'll take it. If your children finished school and didn't know how to read, you'd be up in arms. And all you'd have to do is say, Johnny can't read, I want Johnny reading next year. And they'd start putting programs in place so white Johnny can read. There are generations of people of my complexion who don't know how to read. And I'm going to let the same white people stay in control of the education of our children when they've destroyed us all of these generations? Thank you, Mr. President.
Relinquish the remainder of my time to Senator Chambers. Thank you.
Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Ashford. Members of the legislature, I'm going to be repetitive all session. People who go to church hear the same thing from the preacher every Sunday. There are Catholics who can repeat masses by heart. I know that because I went to a Jesuit university. So if those things can be repeated, the things that are important certainly can. And repetition is a part of instructing. I have pointed out that reports in the World Herald have chronicled how poorly black children are achieving on these tests. Not the make-up individual homemade stuff that each school is allowed to put together under rules of the State Department of Education, but tests like the California Achievement Test. 3 very important areas: reading, language, and math. In OPS, the white children test in the 70-something percentile. The black children in the 22-something percentile. 20-something percentile. And I'm supposed to watch my children cheated in these public schools, then hear Dr. McKeel and other hench persons he'll bring, and people on this floor who praise and boast about how good education is in OPS, but not one of them is black. Even Senator Howard, who is one of the staunchest defenders of OPS, cannot say that her daughter went to a school where the achievement level was in the 20-something percentile. I emphasize that I've learned white people's English. English is not the indigenous language of the continent from which I hail. Chambers would not be my last name if somebody hadn't dragged people of my complexion over here on a slave boat. Y'all ran over here on the Pinta, the Nina, the Santa Maria, and these other boats because you wanted to come here. They dragged us here in chains, kept us ignorant. It was against the law if a white person had the decency to teach me how to read. Because the philosophy of America is that an educated black man is a good plow hand spoiled. You all never were owned as property. Senator White, I read the other day, is proud of his Irish roots. So he will know what Nina means, N-I-N-A. I've talked to audiences filled and studied with Irish who did not know that those letters stood for no Irish need apply. And some Irish people are the most racist ones we have to contend with. When schools were put together where black children could attend, Irish were the ones who sometimes burned them to the ground, led the mobs. People who were similarly mistreated as we were. But do you know why I'm concerned about everybody's child? I presume that every person who has a child cares about that child in the way that I care about mine. And children should not be punished for the way they were born. They should not be punished for who their parents are. They should not be punished for anything as far as I'm concerned. So, when so much time is spent in these classrooms and our children are achieving in the 20-something percentile, you all are the ones who ought to say, Ernie, you are crazy not to stand up every opportunity you have and speak against that. This is what the public schools are doing. And I'm supposed to accept status quo. I never shall. And I will, Senator Copeland, I need not attack you, but I will attack Buffett. I will attack all those I mentioned. I will attack Dr. McKeel and anybody else who has a guilty hand in messing over our children. I'm not a nice guy when it comes to that. I want them to deal with me. I'm a grown man. I can fight, and I know how to fight. Don't take it out on these children and parents who are intimidated. Come after me and do to me what you threaten these other people with, and let's see how it turns out. And I'm still just one against all of them. But I'm going to see that our children get something as long as I have breath in my body. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I hadn't looked up to see the pharmacy students. I would want every child of my complexion to be able to aspire to be a pharmacy student. If they can't read, will they ever sit up there in a white coat? The only time they'll wear a white coat, maybe in a hospital, is when they're mopping floors and taking out dirty bed linen. If you can read, you can educate yourself to a great extent. I'm one of the slowest readers you will ever find. I'm a painstakingly slow reader, but I understand what I read and I retain things. And I've learned more after I graduated from Creighton and Creighton's law school than I learned while I was there, because not a great deal of teaching went on. But I take it as my responsibility to develop my mind to the extent that I can. There are black children with far more natural talent and ability than I have. The ability to go further than I could even dream of going, realistically speaking. But if you take a child and you stunt that child's intellectual growth, if you see a spark of imagination in the child's eyes, you blow it out. Then you get what we are confronting in our community a lot of times. I believe that education, proper education, can go a great way in diminishing the number of crimes black youngsters commit against other black youngsters. I believe education can go a long way in reducing the number of births out of wedlock among all groups. I believe that it provides the avenue out of whatever bad circumstances you may find yourself in. It's through education and being exposed to things beyond what you see in your neighborhood or your city or your state or even in your country that will inspire your imagination and let you know that there is something better in this world than what you're confronting now, and that you have a chance to reach out and take hold of it, but you have to have the tools. They are intellectual tools. They should be sharpened and honed in the classroom. No child should leave a classroom without knowing how to read if reading is one of the components of that educational unit. But if our kids don't know how to read, that's so much the better, because they're not supposed to read. Our children are not supposed to be educated to be leaders. They're to be trained to be workers and flunkies and semi-slaves. When people are ignorant, much of the world is shut off from them. Cuba under Castro is condemned as a communist country. They have one of the highest literacy rates in the world. They're around 98%, a poor country. But if those Spanish-speaking children came to this country, the conclusion would be automatically, well, they can't learn because they don't speak English. But look what's happening in Cuba. There are white entrepreneurs looking hungrily at Cuba, saying that as soon as Castro is no longer there, they will have the most literate workforce in the world. They acknowledge. So we should be able, if we're serious about improving education, to learn from anybody. Castro is doing a much better job of educating all the children and people in Cuba than what is being done in the United States. Anytime America is compared with any other country that is supposed to be a part of the first or second world,
1 minute.
America comes off very, very poorly. You have a president who glories in and revels in his ignorance. He brags about how ignorant he is. He boasts about the fact that he cannot speak English. And that's the example for the children. Suppose I stood up here and fractured the language and then talked about education. You'd say, Ernie, you're an example of what education is supposed to correct. That's what Bush is. I wouldn't want my children to grow up, or anybody's children to grow up, and do no better with the language than what Bush does. And I certainly would not teach them to be proud of being ignorant. Thank you, Mr. President.
If we're going to make this a better place to live, it's going to take education. And quite honestly, folks, we're not progressing the way we should. The world today is asking for an entire different skill set that all of America is unable to produce and to meet. And so what we need to be addressing then is, what is that skill set? How do we develop that skill set? What is that skill set that will accomplish what you want to accomplish? Because I support what you're saying in regard to children and what it will do for the rest of Nebraska. Senator Chambers.
Senator Harms, you asked the right question. I don't have much time. How much time does remain, Mr. President?
2:30.
I'll do what I can. In order to modify conduct, you must modify thought patterns. The attitude of this society in general toward education must change. But I can't wait for that to happen. I'm saying that local control, which white people have always had and taken for granted, must be made available to us so that we hire the superintendent, we hire the administrators, the teachers, formulate the curriculum, and make everybody who deals with our children accountable to us. Give the parents of those children a stake in the education of their children, meaning that when they visit the school, they're not going to be treated rudely, dismissively, as though they're children. And if they are aggressive in pushing for the welfare of their children, in OPS they can be banned and barred from ever coming to visit the school where their children attend. So we've got to get those kind of impediments out of the way before we can even talk about the specific issues. But the environment in these schools has to be changed so that the community where the school is located will view it as a child-friendly place, something, an institution designed to provide uplift. Then we will make our children know that there will be expectations placed upon them. We will not accept a failing grade.
1 minute.
We insist that they achieve at the level of the grade they are attending. We will make sure that in that school there is an adequate library, adequate textbooks. At North High, for example, which is a predominantly minority school in Omaha, it's supposed to be magnet school. They didn't even have textbooks for all the children for the first few weeks, at least 2 months of the school, and I had to keep badgering and hammering just to get textbooks. So, Senator Harms, 2 minutes is not long enough to say it. I can only touch on some of the very serious problems that have to be moved out of the way just to convert the building and the school into the environment that ought to be there. Then we can put into that building the kind of people who know their subject and have the ability to impart it to the students.
Then to make, or 1 ounce to make 2 ounces in the shot.
Okay,
glass.
now I'm following you. Okay.
Okay.
And we don't know at this point whether, as Senator Loudon was trying to find out, it would be 21,000 gallons coming out of the still or 21,000 after it's been cut. So are you going to take it as it comes out of the still or as it's been blended?
Well, I'm considering that it's been blended at this point.
Okay.
Okay, there's 128 ounces in a gallon.
Okay.
If you diluted that 2-for-1, there's 256 ounces in that gallon.
Okay. Well, no, not 256 ounces in the gallon. There'd be 250
of blended liquor.
Okay. Well, wait a minute. 128 ounces of unblended liquor would equal a gallon.
Right.
Okay. Then that gallon is not going to hold 256 ounces. You could produce 2 gallons out of that, but you would have to have 2 gallons. That 1 gallon wouldn't contain 256. It would still contain 128 of whatever it is. So we'd have to put another gallon over here.
Right.
So we'd have 2 gallons out of that 1. Just for the record, okay?
At any rate, using my assumption.
Well, see, I was educated at OPS, so you got to go slowly with me, okay?
That if we produce 256 ounces of 100 proof liquor out of every gallon, and took that times 21,000, I have 5,376,000 shots that would be almost exactly 3 shots for every man, woman, and child in the state of Nebraska, and my concern is that we're calling this a micro-distillery.
And Senator Whiteman, although I didn't have the exact calculation, I was going toward what you brought us to. What restaurant would legitimately serve that much liquor to the casual diner who would casually want something to accompany a meal?
Well, not being that familiar with the restaurant industry, I would say none in the state of Nebraska, but I don't know that.
Thank you. Now I'd like to ask the introducer of the bill a question.
Senator Inequity, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator, where did the 21,000 gallons annually come from? Where did that figure come from? Did the ones who brought the bill offer that figure? 1 minute.
I believe so, and I think that and I don't want to speak for them, but I think in an examination of other states' micro-distillery laws is what.
But there is nothing that makes that number written in stone. Is that true? If I wanted to reduce that number to 10,000 gallons, that still would be a tremendous number of shots available. If I reduce it to 10,000 gallons, would you accept that?
Let me talk to. I don't know. I know that they have no anticipation whatsoever of wrapping up immediately to 21,000 gallons. I do know that. They said that at the public hearing. But I don't want to. If it is a successful business model and they're successful in competing with liquors that are shipped in from other states, then I also don't want to be an impediment to them, being successful.
Time. Mr. Clerk, do you have an amendment?
Mr. President, I do. Senator Chambers has moved to amend LB 549 with floor amendment 11.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Chambers, you're recognized to open on your floor amendment.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, I'm not a prude, I'm not a Puritan, and okay, that's enough. What my amendment would do is reduce that gallonage per year from 21,000 to 10,000, and I think that's excessive. We don't need more outlets for hard liquor in this state. This bill is not essential for the welfare of any segment of this society. There is no uplift that can be shown to result from more hard liquor being made available. If these restaurants can dispense hard liquor, let them buy from wherever they're buying it. But what this is going to do is add more to the total amount of hard liquor available legally in this state. I don't want that to happen. I could try to kill the bill, and maybe ultimately that will be the approach I will take. I want to see how many of my colleagues who at other times are going to moan and whine about drunk driving, moan and whine about the young people being minors in possession, moan and whine and talk about how devastating the illegal consumption of liquor can be, yet the example that the young people have is provided by all the best people in society. Look who's in this chamber. Well, maybe you shouldn't look too hard, but let me, for the sake of this example, you've got the best that Nebraska can produce, and maybe you do, really. And they're saying make more liquor available, more stills available. In the spirit of what Senator Loudon was saying, there was a song that said, the sun shines on the roof, but the moon shines in the cellar. Now, Senator Snicky may not know what moonshine is either if he didn't know what white lightning is. I'm listening for somebody to tell me the societal benefit to come from this bill. There can be the generalized statements about tourism, which is always the refuge of those who don't have a solid argument to support something. Restaurateurs will make more money if they can have their stills on the place and produce enough to sell more than 1 million shots a year. I hear much moaning and whining about how devastated the restaurant industry is. There are smaller ones going out of business almost every day, even in Omaha. So why should this bill be enacted into law? Because Senator Snickey is trying to help some constituents of his get what they want, which is to make more hard liquor available that is produced on the place. But since it's not going to be consumed on the place because they will not have that many customers, the idea is for them to be able to sell it and make money. And what difference does it make if they say, well, you have to meet the same standards as anybody else selling it? Well, if I decide to become a whiskey seller, I know that's what I'm going to have to do. And I'd want to be able to distill my own whiskey if I want to. I'd like to ask Senator Sinowicki a question. And I hope I didn't mispronounce his name by putting those silent letters in.
Senator Sinowicki, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
What is the highest proof that hard liquor can be and be legally sold in this state? Is there any maximum?
It's under the bill, under this bill for Nebraska-made products, it'd be 100 proof. It's actually lower than other states.
Okay, 100 proof. And if we accept what Senator Loudon told us, that when the stuff comes straight out of the still, it's 180 proof, are we talking about 21,000 gallons of 100 proof or 21,000 gallons of 180 proof? Because
Senator Chambers,
proof
a lot of this won't be on the upper end in terms of alcohol content. A lot of this will be 70 proof, 60 proof. You know, you can walk in any liquor store or any liquor license establishment in our state, Senator Chambers, and buy any assortment of hard liquors. This is having an ability for Nebraska-made products to compete with some of the products that come into the state.
That simply doesn't answer the question, Senator Sinowicki. I'm going to ask it again. And having been educated in OPS, I know that my English might be somewhat difficult to understand, so I'm going to speak as slowly and clearly as I can. If this distilled beverage, when it comes out of the still, is 180 proof, and your bill says that the proof of this beverage, which is going to be produced and distributed under your bill, cannot be more than 100 proof. When we get to the definition, and the definition says no more than 21,000 gallons annually can be produced, will that 21,000 gallons comprise 180 proof or 100 proof? Which is the measure?
The final product will be much less than 100 proof. They cannot distill liquor at an alcohol content rate of 180. It's 100 proof.
So
that's what I'm told.
So you mean that you want to allow 21,000 gallons of 180 proof whiskey, White Lightning, moonshine, to be produced in this micro-distillery? Is that true? When they came to you, they said, we want 21,000 gallons of 180 proof. Is that what they said, or they didn't make a distinction?
Okay, it's Senator Chambers, it's my understanding that the maximum proof, or when you say proof, I think you're meaning the pure alcohol content within the product, cannot exceed 100 proof. And I think there are a variety of products on our shelves now throughout Nebraska. There's, hundreds of thousands of gallons of distilled spirits that come to the state, and anyone could buy any of these.
That's not what I'm talking about.
And I got my light on. It's 100 proof, 21,000 gallons up to 100 proof is what I'm told. Okay, not 180. They can't do 180 proof.
Okay, 21,000 gallons. Now, my amendment says we reduce that amount to 10,000 gallons. Did these people who came to you tell you that that amount that they would make under this bill will be consumed on the premises? Did they tell you that falsehood?
Senator Chambers, their ultimate. I got my light on. I'll give you time.
Go ahead. I'm not going to cut you
I just
off.
want to be responsive. Senator Chambers, there's no way they're going to make up to 21,000 gallons as a start-off. But their long-term business plan is for them to be competitive on the market with all these ship-in distilled spirits. And what they want to do ultimately under the long-term business plan is to market their products throughout the state and perhaps out of the state, but particularly within the state. They want to market their product so it competes with Seagram's and your different
Canadian Club,
and those sorts of things.
John Barleycorn.
They want, and this would be a Nebraska-made product that would compete with these other distilled spirits that, you're talking about 21,000 gallons compared and contrasted with what comes into this state?
Well, I'd like to stop that too, but we can't. Here's what I'm going to ask you then. Are you willing to reduce the amount that can be made on the premises and served on the premises of a restaurant or in a hotel?
Is it your intent then that the 10,000 gallons be restricted to what can be consumed or what can be made at a micro-distillery?
Produced. Because under your bill, that amount can be produced on the premises of a restaurant. Isn't that true if it has a liquor license?
Yes. And
so are you willing, but it also can apply in places other than a restaurant. Is that true?
Well, that'd have to be a liquor. No, that's not true. It'd have to be a liquor establishment that is that holds a liquor license to sell liquor products.
So it could be a bar or a tavern. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Okay. So we're not just talking about a restaurant. We're talking about full-fledged liquor establishments. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Members of the legislature, I'd like to ask Senator Sinowicki a question. Senator Sinowicki, will they make corn liquor?
Senator Sinowicki, would you yield to the question?
Will they use corn to make this liquor, among other substances?
Yes, I will yield. And Senator Chambers, I don't know. I suspect they use corn, wheat, and I can look at their testimony.
Barley and
and
sugar and beets, carrots and whatnot. But at any rate, they might use some of the grains that are produced in Nebraska to make this liquor. Perhaps.
I believe they will.
Okay.
That's what they inform me of.
So you go, Senator Lathrop goes across the street and puts ethanol, which is corn gasoline, in his car. Then he comes over to Senator Sinowicki and puts corn liquor in his gullet. That's kind of what we're looking at here, huh? A complement, C-O-M-P-L-E-M, a complement to ethanol in the car. We want to put some corn.
Time.
Okay. Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
President. You know why it's difficult to compare Nebraska to any other state? Nebraska has about 1,780,000 people in the whole state. Now, why in the world would they be allowed to generate as much whiskey as is generated in a state that has cities with 5 times more people than the state of Nebraska has? This bill is not something that is a positive good. The preachers didn't ask for it. They can get enough liquor. They can go get a gallon of Mogan David and maybe take care of their religious drinking for a month or whatever wine they drink and serve up in church to the children. This is not a good bill. Beer and whiskey are not the same thing. Beer is regulated differently from whiskey. A license to sell beer is not giving you the right to sell whiskey. So to simply take a system over here, the brew pub, that allows you to brew beer and say we're going to let the same thing be done over here with whiskey should not be done. They like to say comparing apples to oranges. These are not the same beverages. They do not produce the same effect when you give the same volume of each to a person. Whichever has the greater concentration of alcohol is going to have the greater effect on the person when it's consumed, as opposed to beer. My amendment reduces this amount to 10,000, which I think is still excessive. Senator Inequity continues to tell us that none of these people are going to invest in an operation that would produce 21,000 gallons no matter how we arrive at that figure. Then why not start at 10,000? Why not? Because these people are greedy and they can maneuver this legislature because the liquor industry has power here. When we were talking about a bill of Senator Cruz, he's absent. He's missing in action. Senator Cruz, where in the world are you? He's not on this floor. We're talking about consuming alcohol under circumstances which might result in a person leaving with that alcohol in his or her system and getting behind the wheel of a car. His bill was trying to find a way to trace the origin of these beer kegs that are winding up in the hands of young people at these beer bashes. They want to get to the adults who may be purchasing and making them available because the youngsters cannot purchase these things on their own. But there were certain steps that would not be put into the law because they would be too inconvenient to the liquor industry. We were talking about the welfare of children, underage drinking, but the overarching concern was with the convenience of the liquor industry. So here comes the liquor industry again. I know they oil you all up at every gathering that you go to. What is happy hour? And all these other things. I don't go to any of those things that they give to the senators, but I look at some of the invitations. At one point, I was going to save all of them and see how many liquor-consuming opportunities there were for the legislators. Then maybe I'd have a better understanding of why their conduct can be so erratic on occasion. They bring the liquor in. They bring John Barleycorn in the demijohn. Then it winds up in the gullet of Senator John, whoever that might happen to be. I'm just pulling a name out of the air to go along with demijohn. Do you all think you're serving your constituents when you pass this bill? How many of you, when you were wearing out all that shoe leather you told us about, told your constituents, one of the things I'm going to do is make more outlets of liquor available? Make it possible for more people to distill liquor and dispense it. A lot of liquor is coming into the state from outside, so more liquor needs to be produced.
Time, Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, if this amendment is adopted, I still don't like the bill, but I'll leave it alone. I'm basing my amendment on what we were told. Y'all don't pay attention on this floor to what speakers are saying. I'm not going to call a certain senator to my right across the aisle sitting in the middle desk by name, but if he'd pay attention, he'd see that my amendment is not going contrary to what Senator Snicky told us. Now, he's the one who said they're not going to start with 21,000 gallons. This figure, according to what my seatmate in the Culture Corner said, is not magic. 21,000, it's not magic. It's not abracadabra. It's not presto changeo. It was taken looking at what might be done in other states. That gentleman asked where, he doesn't know where Senator Chambers comes from with his 10,000. It came out of my head. My brain is working. And I'm listening to what Senator Inequity said, and I'm processing it. 10,000 gallons a year is enough to start with. He told us that they're not going to jump right in with this amount, take my amendment, and hush me up. That's what you can do. You're not going to get a better deal than that. Why, if I were the mafia, I'd say I'm offering you something you can't refuse. This is a deal you can't pass up. You're not going to get this kind of deal often. Let me ask Senator Sinowicki a question or two, if I may. I feel almost intoxicated. I'm having so much fun.
Senator Sinowicki, would you yield to a question?
Yeah, I will.
Senator Sinowicki, in your experience down here, how many times have you seen a deal of the kind that I'm offering where I don't kill a bill, where I say I'll leave the bill alone, and I'm basing an amendment on what I've been hearing from the introducer? How many times have you seen me make a deal like that?
Well, quite a time, Senator, and I've had opportunity to engage with my constituent business relative to this, and they're willing to accept the 10,000 gallon at this point, again, because as you indicated and as I did on the floor, this is a startup. They have quite a bit of investment, and they had no illusions whatsoever that they would ramp up to 21,000 gallons. It takes quite some time for them to arrive at that. So in terms of their immediate business plans, they have the 10,000 gallon max, although it's kind of out of the minimum side relative to other states and relative to the amount of distilled spirits that flows to our state.
Well, they don't have me in another. Thank you, Senator Sinowicki. They don't have me in another state to deal with, so they get anything through their legislature that they want. That's why I don't go by what these other states have. They have nobody like me anywhere in the country. But the reason I started talking earlier about that monitoring, how are we going to monitor how much is actually produced? If there's no monitoring, and Senator Sinowicki acknowledged that they're not going to start at 21,000 gallons immediately, I'm cynical. I'm suspicious. I don't think these people would be, I'm telling you my opinion, would be above being a front for the distribution of liquor that comes from someplace else, maybe even from outside the state. They're not going to produce it themselves. They can buy all the bottles that they want to. They can put it in their bottle and do things that are not contemplated by the people on this floor. Maybe nobody else thinks like that, but I do. And I act in accord with my thoughts. Since Senator Sinowicki said that his constituents will accept the 10,000 in place of the 21,000, I'm going to let this be my closing, and I will take a vote on that amendment. Senator Sinowicki said, Senator Sinowicki, will you support it? Senator Sinowicki said he nodded, yes, he will support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Chambers, there was another light on. Senator McDonald is recognized.
Mr. President and members of the...
Close.
Thank you. Mr. President, usually we say you must crawl before you walk. Well, really, in this instance, you must stagger before you walk. That is my closing. I will ask for a call of the House because I don't see many of us here, and then I'll take a machine vote.
Thank you, Senator Chambers.
Members of the legislature, on page 2, in line 5, I would strike the word judge and insert in its place commissioner, and the same on line 9. I had to do it in 2 steps because in line 5, the word judge is new language, so I had to make the commissioner new language. And in line 9, the word judge is a part of existing law, so all I had to do was say strike it and insert commissioner. Since Senator Erdman made a valid point, at the time this bill was offered, these individuals were called judges. So it was determined that their salary increase would have to be done the same way that of judges' salaries will be increased. But they, in fact, are not judges, so their salary can be raised just like the salary of any other public employee. However, to ensure that the term judge does not apply to them anywhere, I would put the word commissioner in place of judge. Although I have a bill moving across the floor, there was strong enough support to adopt it. I would not want the word judge to appear in some places when there should be the word commissioner every place. Then this language could be corrected where it says as soon as the same may be legally paid under the Constitution of Nebraska, that would become surplusage because no salary increase for an employee can take effect before it's allowed under the Constitution. So that language would be surplusage. But rather than rewrite all of that, I'm simply making this bill conform to the one moving across the board, which would change the designation of these commissioners from judges to commissioner. And I think I've explained it all, but if you have any questions, I will answer them. Thank you, Madam President.
But at the same time, we don't treat them as judges under existing law, but now under the salary proposal we are. It seems that we should be consistent, and so I would support an idea that would state their salary specifically as they are not judges. I don't believe that their salary should be tied to the judicial system. Thank you, Madam President.
Seeing no more lights on, Senator Chambers, would you like to close on your amendment?
Yes, I would, Madam President. And I agree with what Senator Erdman is saying. But the purpose of my amendment is just to bring about consistency and harmonization. And I think his approach would be the correct one, but I think we could do that on select file. However, Senator Cornett will be able to address that when time comes to actually move the bill itself. All my amendment does is insert the word commissioner in place of judge. Thank you, Madam President.